We're in sync here, Rob. Look at that.
Oh, wait, I've got to lean the other way.
Close enough. Hello, everyone. We're here. Rob, the Beatles, All You Need Is Love. It is Love Day, but I get the sense, Rob, that you and I are both the kind of people that it could be August 21st and we could just choose for it to be Valentine's Day. That's the type of person I am, at least.
Oh yeah, I recognize Valentine's Day. I have a card and a little bit of chocolate for my husband. Nothing super fancy, but yeah, like why should you not express your gratitude and love and appreciation for others and those that you care about other days of the year?
Any day you want.
Yeah. So we tend to skip the big manufactured. I can't even remember the last time I went out for dinner on Valentine's Day to celebrate Valentine's Day. Our anniversary, yes. Birthday, yes, absolutely. And that makes it, to me, that makes it more special because it's about then just the two people.
Yeah. And as I've become a dad with now, my eldest is nearly 6, Valentine's Day is a big day, but it's more for the kids, which is nice.
Yes. I did bake cupcakes yesterday. So,
essentials.
Right.
Please let us know if you are here. We might have some issues with the comments here in StreamYard today, so I'm cheating and have us up here as well. But hop into the comments. Let us know if you're here, where you're here from, and joining us from. Delighted to be here with my friend Rob Volpe, who your book, Tell Me More About That, comes out in 8 days.
8 days, 2/22/22.
Nice.
Tuesday.
Yes, Tuesday, February, the 2nd month of the year, 22nd day of the month, and the 22nd year in the new millennium.
Exactly.
Kind of perfect.
We're almost a quarter of the way through the new millennium. Not a quarter of the way through the millennium, through the century.
Yeah.
That's kind of scary.
Very cool. So Rob is in San Francisco. I'm in Toronto, which we discovered is the same latitude. So we're on the same plane here. And we're here to talk about empathy. We're here to talk about your new book, which I know is full of entertaining, wonderful stories. I know it's full of challenging your own assumptions. I've learned that we are creatures not without bias. We have bias. We have judgment.
Absolutely.
And it's about noticing when it creeps up and when our bias or judgment is counter to our values.
Yeah.
That's when things get interesting. So yeah, I'd love to talk about empathy, compassion, cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, all the things. So we're wearing shades of red in honor of Valentine's Day and Love Day. Please do hop into the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from, and add in your comments as we go. Add in your questions as we go. And for anyone listening, if we share any resources or whatever it might be, feel free to pop links or anything in there as well. So, Rob, tell us stuff. How's it going? And we'll hop into the convo.
Yeah, it's great. Happy Valentine's Day. Yeah, week away from launch. Really excited. I'm really excited because of, the importance of the topic, but also the reception that it's been getting so far. People are really resonating with the stories, which is what I set out to do, is to help people understand more about empathy, but rather than sort of lecture or stand, Sermon on the Mount style. It's like, no, here's what I've gone through. Here's what I've learned on my journey in understanding the 5 steps. Really fortunate to be a market researcher with my firm Ignite 360, and that's enabled me to go talk to thousands of people over the last 15 years to understand how people think and feel, but then at the same time doing some reflection myself, because I think every time you have any interaction with somebody, you're not only hearing about them, but you're mirroring back and have a chance to really think about how you're responding in this situation.
Yeah.
And all of that, and a lot of the thinking that's out there around empathy and the studies that are there, led me to develop these 5 steps, because what I found was no one was explaining in the moment, everybody's saying, oh, you've got to go get more empathy. We need empathy in our society. And not just, in the last year, not just in the last 5 years, but, for the last 20 years has been a really significant empathy decline. And so great. All these pundits and commentators and thought leaders are all saying, oh, you've got to go get some more empathy. But nobody was explaining like, okay, great. What does that mean? How do I do that? If I've got...
Isn't it in aisle 3?
Right, exactly. Let me go. Well, now you can actually go to aisle 3 and pick up. Tell me more about that. And that'll help you. But
well played.
Thanks. But no one was explaining. It was driving me nuts. You'd read these articles and people would say, and they're correct, like, yes, you need to immerse yourself in somebody else's life. You need to try to step in their shoes. But that's not easy to do, and stuff gets in the way. So I really set out to break it down and to show what you needed to do in order to get to empathy. And I'm just fortunate in the place that I sit in, as I mentioned, my own experiences, but then also we are challenged with helping our clients have empathy with their consumers. So it's not just me interviewing somebody, and because I can build that connection, but if my brand manager, if the R&D lead isn't understanding and connecting empathetically with who their consumer is, they're never going to be able to create new products, new services, new communications that are going to resonate, because they're not going to really understand what those deeper needs are. So we were also looking at, okay, how do we get them to connect empathetically with their consumer? And that's where it was like, oh, there's like 5 steps that we all need to follow.
So before we get into the 5 steps, I mean, I know you come from this very interesting perspective, as you've mentioned, as a market researcher, where you're going into, oftentimes, to my knowledge, people's homes and people who are very different from you. So what a sort of hotbed for an ability to make connections and relationships and attempt to get into someone's universe or shoes. One question I have for you, which we might be skipping a bunch of steps, but how, particularly in your work, how do you toe the gray line between empathy and manipulation? Of like, you sort of equip, a brand manager with insights as to what a consumer wants. How do we keep people honest and ethical when equipping them with the atom bomb of empathy, if you will?
Well, I don't know that I would describe empathy as the atom bomb exactly, but maybe a space age laser. I don't know. Empathy, though, if you're really connecting empathetically, it means that you're understanding who somebody is.
Cool.
So I think, so I guess, yes, I could imagine that I could, brand manager X could build empathy, really deeply understand the needs of that particular consumer, and then manipulate it from a marketing perspective, maybe. But then it runs right up into sort of like authenticity and other things. And you do hope that there are some values and morals that will kick in, and ethics in the business community that you wouldn't actually be manipulating, but you're using it to have deeper understanding so that you can be of service and do the better products and services and, more compelling ad campaigns.
Yeah.
Which can be manipulation, but,
sure,
it's a capitalistic society that we live in. So
yeah. Well, but I know you wrote this book more so from the perspective, and what you truly care about is, we're living in a modern age of an empathy crisis, where it seems that there's far more that, at least what we pay attention to in the media or what's sent to us in the media, there's far more that divides us than brings us together. This is a nice embodiment of getting together, a cross-border LinkedIn Live. But I guess, does it make sense? Hop into those 5 steps, tell us, help us go from, okay, I understand empathy from a rational perspective, but how do we actually do it?
Right. So yes, empathy has been in decline, measured decline, since about 2001. University of Michigan study of studies, college life surveys from 1979 to 2009. They did a meta-analysis, 76 schools. They found starting in 2001, there was a 40% decline in empathy, and it stayed reduced from that period. And apparently,
did it happen in the month of September, or?
Yeah, I know. I have in a PowerPoint slide when I give this one of my talks on empathy, and I've started saying post 2000 because naturally people's inclination is, oh, it's because of September 11th, and that's why. But if it was because of September 11th, I think you would see kind of the curve that like the economy can take, and there'll be a decline. We'll have like a recession, but it would start to rebound as we move forward and recollect ourselves. What I believe happened is the culmination of many different things that, it's the unintended consequences of good intentions.
Okay.
If you think about kids that were in college in 2000, 2001, they grew up children of the 90s. What was going on in the 90s? Well, we were starting to schedule our kids in a lot more activities, for multiple reasons. One was good childcare, like, hey, mom and dad are both working. And so therefore, instead of, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I was in that latchkey generation where we just came home and took care of ourselves and, made mac and cheese and watched, whatever was on TV. Here, kids started to get scheduled, and then parents also were starting to really feel the pressure of, my kid needs to get into a good school, and therefore they need a good resume. And so Johnny and Sally are going to go to all these different, activities. So it was serving multiple purposes there.
Mm-hmm.
Technology continued to evolve and develop, where we're having, one direction interactions with something that can't give us emotional support back. So even like video game playing, even if you're playing with somebody else, and used to be back then, you were sitting on the sofa side by side. Now you're, everybody's in the cloud playing these games in the meta, and soon to be in the metaverse, and you're not actually connecting and interacting with each other. You're worried about your own score and advancing through the game. So there's no empathy building that's happening there. And with all of those things that are going on, kids stopped having time to be bored. And that, mom, I'm bored, what should I do? And mom or dad would say, well, go play in the backyard or go upstairs to your room and figure something out. And that's oftentimes when kids would go and start to role play, or they'd play with action figures or things that would transport them into another world. And they had to use empathy to be that other person. They had to imagine what it felt like, what might it be like to be Iron Man, to be Tony Stark, to be Peter Parker as Spider-Man, and how do I then move through the world as Peter Parker Spider-Man rather than me as Spider-Man in some crazy multiverse setup.
Yeah.
So then, okay, all of that's going on, led to this decline. Now, people in 2001 that were in college are like 42, maybe 41. So they've lived a good part of their life. They're starting to enter middle age, and their parents, they're in the workforce. All sorts of things are happening, and they've got to decrease in empathy ability. And so that's where the 5 steps start to come in. It's like, okay, well, what can you actually do? Because even though 2 more statistics, in a recent survey from January, we found 31% of American adults are unable to easily see the point of view of other people. Yeah. Just couldn't even agree with this statement. Yes, I can see the point of view of others. And since that's self-reported data, the actual figures are actually even higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even, Rob, I'm thinking, that study is up to 2009. I mean, I got on Facebook in the early days, which was 2005. And it was already around for a couple of years, but now we're far more algorithmic in what we are consuming.
Yeah, and then there's the whole social media angle of it. There's the ideological bubbles that have now been created, where you're able to connect with people that might have the same viewpoints, and you go down that rabbit hole. And you can be stuck, and you don't get exposure to other people, particularly during a pandemic when you're supposed to be staying at home.
Yeah.
But the idea of, being in the cave, if you think about our prehistoric times, that's kind of, the cave was our community. It was our neighborhood. It was our family. That's not necessarily the case anymore. The cave has been shattered and is, global. And so, yes, so many different things are contributing to our lack of empathy. And then you're not seeing it in leadership, without getting too deep into the politics, but you're not seeing it show up in leadership. You're not seeing empathetic expression and support. And that signals to a lot of people that behavior is okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue to do that. And yet, empathy is something that we are born with. It's an innate skill. It's something that neuroscientists have found. There's two different types of empathy, which you mentioned. There's emotional and cognitive, and we'll unpack that in a sec. But they show up in different parts of your brain. So it exists. Like there are centers in the brain for it. And what we need to be able to do is rebuild the muscle. So I also talk about, I love analogy and metaphor. It's how I tell stories. So another analogy or metaphor is that empathy is like a muscle, and our muscle is just atrophied. And so we need to get it back into shape. And so the 5 steps helps people have awareness of, if you're doing exercises at the gym and you've got an instructor and they're telling you, like, focus on that particular muscle, think about it. And you've got to do very specific things in order to isolate and strengthen that particular muscle. Well, the 5 steps helps you find the empathy muscle and isolate it and exercise it and work to get there.
Nice.
So yeah, there's 5 steps. Number 1, dismantle judgment. Hardest step, I think. And for me personally, and from what our data is showing us, for many people, it's the hardest step. Then there's asking good questions. And then we've got active listening. So paying attention, not just with your ears, but with your eyes. What else are you picking up? Nonverbal cues, things you're noticing in the background. And then you've got integrate into understanding. That's the challenge of making room in your head, that just because I believe this way, someone else might like a different flavor of ice cream, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And then the 5th step is finally using solution imagination. So that's when you are trying to imagine what it might be like to be them in order to further a conversation. And that is then a point of empathy.
Nice. I was taught, and we can go more in depth into those steps if you want to talk about cognitive emotional. A couple of things. One, I think we are having a tech issue with the comments. So if you're trying to comment and it's not working, I'm not just going to say try harder. We're aware that there's an issue, and Rob and I will just affirm to you that we'll be as engaging and helpful as possible in this conversation, we hope. Rob, as you went through those 5 steps, I remember an experience of mine where a mentor of mine taught me the equation: your truth plus my truth equals higher truth. And
Yeah.
I remember distinctively, I was part of a company retreat. I sat in a meeting, and the meeting to me was so productive. Like, it felt like there was, pressure in a pressure cooker that was like finally let go. We were having the conversations we needed to. Like, it felt so healthy. And then I debriefed that meeting with a colleague later that night, in the best place where debriefs can happen, a hot tub. And we started speaking, privately, and my colleague, who I love and is a dear friend and I respect, sort of shared her perspective that it was quite possibly the worst and most disgusting meeting that she was ever part of in her career. And I went,
Wow.
whoa. It was just like, it kind of like blew my mind, and I could see where she was coming from. Like, at first I felt that judgment of like, what, were we in the same meeting? And then I could understand her perspective and hold both her experience and my experience and others' experiences all as truthful.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And and it's a common, I think, misperception that people have with empathy, that and why people resist having to have empathy is they feel like they've got to give up their own beliefs. And that's not the case. You can still have your truth. It's just recognizing that there might be another truth that's out there. And then, yes, and I think this might be where your earlier conversation had gone about the higher truth. It's like, when you take those two truths together, you can find out how to work together and figure something out. But it's going to elevate you to this sort of higher place, because you're starting to understand a broader sort of human condition or human set of truths.
Yeah. Or wow, my experience isn't the only experience. Or just because I perceive it as truth doesn't mean that others do as well, which, perhaps is a gateway to empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, recognizing that is huge. It's dismantling so much judgment that you have, and that you didn't even realize. I don't think you would maybe have identified or self-admitted, like, oh yeah, I carry a lot of judgment with me. But that was a bias that you had. You had a great experience, therefore you think everybody else around you had a great experience, and that's not always the case. Not always the case. And we rush so quickly into situations and meetings and things without taking the time. I actually commented on someone's LinkedIn yesterday. They were talking about taking the time to, is a great analogy, tuning, like the way an orchestra will tune up and everybody's tuning to the same key. Somebody had asked him a question about mental focus and not being able to show up until like 5 minutes into the meeting. Like they're like, I can physically be there on this Zoom call, but my brain doesn't really show up for about 5 minutes because they're still processing all the other things, like, that had gone on. And so I had likened it to, like, you need to have small talk in the beginning of a conversation. Like you and I chatted for a few minutes before this. That was the orchestra, or the two-man ensemble, tuning up and tuning together so that we were on in some sort of sync, so that we could then come on and make beautiful music together here on LinkedIn Live. But it's examples of that. It's taking that moment to recognize, like, not everybody is on the same page. Not everybody's having the exact same experience. And I mean, A, they're not you, and then B, there's all the things that have been going on for them in their day and the way that they're reacting and responding to that stuff. So it's so important to keep that judgment dismantled and go and understand, somebody else is having a very different experience.
Yeah. And I think that the key piece in dismantling judgment is to acknowledge we are a judging creature. Like we just judge, and to dismantle and understand it, not just ignore it, like actually draw it in and go, like, and get curious with it ourselves.
Yeah.
Such that we can name it and then move
and
through it.
And it's interesting because there's two types of judgment. There's making a judgment, which is, do I go down that dark alley by myself? Do I accept a job? What's, decision making judgment? And then there's being judgmental, which can be, obviously casting aspersion. But I think even in your situation, it's applying a perspective, a bias that you had, your point of view, and just blanket assessing that, or smacking it on top of everything else. And it's like, no, that's being judgmental about it.
So there's a difference between owning one's experience versus casting one's experience as the absolute truth, and no other truths can exist because that's the truth.
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And, and it's hard. I mean, there you are at the end of, this immersive session, and you're immersed in a hot tub with a colleague, and you're like, do you want to just say, God, that was an amazing meeting, instead of going, how was that meeting for you? What were your thoughts? And asking, which is a good open question, versus like just charging right into it and expressing your opinion, which then put her into a place of potential discomfort. I mean, she was able to find the, no, that's not my truth. I need to speak up and say something.
If I recall the conversation, I think I probably came in with, I probably made a statement saying, wow, I thought that was so great.
Yeah.
Maybe I said, what did you think? I'm not sure. But there was enough active listening for me to go, like, hold on a second. My spidey senses tell me that they didn't have the same experience as me. Ramp up curiosity.
You were active listening. You were reading her nonverbals. You're maybe intuiting something. There is that sixth sense that's out there that we also love to ignore. But you were picking something up, and then, and fortunately you were curious enough and have enough awareness that you started to unpack that.
So do the steps, the 5 steps you've outlined, do you need to go in order, or can you onboard at different
You
points?
can you jump in. They vex you at different times and in different ways. They are not. It's not. It's sequential. Like you kind of need to not. If you don't have your judgment dismantled, then you're going to run into issues with all the other steps.
Yeah.
But it's not that. But I can go into a situation with my judgment dismantled, but maybe I wasn't actively listening. And that, so in that situation, I would need to jump in with active listening, or you might get all the way to the end and just go, you know what? It's really hard for me to get to using solution imagination. What's actually happening here?
Mm-hmm.
Largely that's judgment. And then it's like, okay, do I go back to step one or where do I go? It's kind of more of a circular thing than a linear. With
Yeah.
lots of lines interconnecting and lots of different entry points.
Yeah, I get that there's only so far you can go if you don't dismantle judgment.
Yes.
But you don't necessarily have to start at step 1. I'm hearing you could start with active listening or start with asking better questions, more empathetic, empowering questions. Yeah.
And some people, we've just fielded some data and we're still sorting through all the results. But one of the things we really wanted to understand was which step really is the hardest, because I'm applying my own judgment by saying it's dismantle judgment, of course.
Yeah.
But that might not actually be the case for everybody.
Oh, that's funny.
And the research is showing it's not the case. It is the hardest of all of them, but actually there's a lot of polarization. There's a lot of people that say, oh no, dismantling judgment is not the hardest step for me. I have more trouble actively listening. And you may not be surprised, but men have more of an issue with active listening than women do. And so we're diving in and teasing apart all of that and how empathy shows up in the workplace and who's needing it. And that's fascinating too. Like Gen Z in the workplace, Gen Z men are more in need of empathy from their boss than women are. Women, though, it increases when they're more millennials, so like 30s and early 40s, which is really, it was fascinating about how millennial women versus Gen Z men, their need for empathy from their bosses was showing up so differently.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I have some theories on that, but I'm not ready to
lay
all that out. So I'm just
tune into our next live.
Exactly. Yeah. But even like, so, okay, there are these 5 steps, and dismantle judgment is the hardest, but a lot of people are challenged by either asking good questions or actively listening. And your judgment does solidify, like as we teased apart, like who's really having the hardest time with judgment, it's older white men, like boomer men. And which made me realize, like, oh yeah, when Greta Thunberg said, okay, boomer, she wasn't wrong. Because they were coming at her with a lot of judgment. They weren't open to what she was having to say, and it elicited that response. And it's like, oh yeah, wow, okay. So older white men, and it's not that others don't, but they were acknowledging more challenge, putting their own opinions aside than other cohorts that we were looking at. But a lot of people were having trouble with active listening, with integrating into understanding, all of it. Like it's fascinating.
Cool.
Yeah,
very cool. So I am admittedly multitasking a little bit here. Our mutual friend Brian Wish let us know that the comment section isn't working. So hopefully you can comment after the live, or send myself or Rob or both of us a message on LinkedIn if there's any questions or comments you have that we can address. Maybe it's good fodder for another live, Rob, where we can dive into
answer the questions. Yeah.
Lovely. So I think it'd be great because it was kind of mind-blowing for me to differentiate. I'm just learning about this, and you know a lot more. So cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, how both of those can interplay to get us into compassion, which I'm a huge fan of compassion as well, which is active. So let's talk about that. I know Paul Bloom very much made this work popular with his book Against Empathy, which is more provocative in title than what I think he really means. But can you help us understand the difference between cognitive, emotional empathy and how it can lead us to become more empathetic and compassionate?
Sure. So, yeah, there just like there's two types of judgment, there's two types of empathy. And I mentioned earlier, shows up in different parts of the brain. So one is emotional empathy. And even if you ask when I'm give talks, I always ask, like, how would you define empathy? And you get two answers. You get three. You get feeling the feelings of somebody else, you get seeing the perspective of someone else, and then you get the walk a mile in someone else's shoes, because that was made popular. But seeing the perspective of someone and feeling the feelings of, like, those are not the same thing. They're very different, and
both valuable,
both critical and important, but they are different things, and which leads you to, oh wait, there's actually some differences, and there's two different types of empathy and different things going on. So one of them is emotional empathy, and I think this is the kind of core response, but again, it shows up differently in the brain. But emotional empathy, to use my cave analogy, emotional empathy is what you have with the people that are closest to you, that are truly in your tribe, that are living effectively, like, imagine, tens to hundreds of thousands of years ago, when we were all living in caves and agrarian hunter-gatherer stuff. We were we could understand the feelings of the people that were living in the cave with us. We had the same rituals, beliefs, behaviors. We were coming up, we were raised in the same environment, in the same place. So a lot of things were established, and we could understand how people were feeling and emotional responses. And then someone from the cave down the road came over to visit, and they have their cave looks different. We're on the side of a river, they're overlooking a vista. Like, they've got different behaviors and beliefs and all of that. And the thing we have in common, besides the fact that we're humanoid, whether we're Homo sapien or whatever, but we're human, and we're living in caves, and we're male, female. Like, beyond that, got to start to figure it out. How are you going to have emotional empathy with that? That's really challenging. And there are people that can do it. A true kind of empath, as we talk about, a highly sensitive person can probably get in and tap that. A lot of people, though, cannot. And so you're sitting there looking at, okay, who's this guy from the other cave that's come over? But you can recognize some of the things that you have in common, and you can use cognitive empathy, which is the perspective taking, to go, okay, he's living in a cave. He's got a community in the cave to support, and we're all hunting the same types of animals. We're doing the same things. Therefore, how do I start to understand where he might be coming from, so that you can then communicate effectively with each other? You can collaborate on how do we divide and conquer this territory? How do we work together to grow more grain or whatever it is that we need? And if there's any paleoanthropologists, they're all good at watching this. They're like, he's got none of this right. He's got some like Land of the Lost version of like people living in caves, but go with me. So yes, so there's cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is the thing that we use today, should be using today, with others around us. So you've got your tribe and you're feeling who they are, but anybody that's other, and quite honestly, the people that you work with, you might think of them as your tribe, but they're really not. Because they didn't grow up the way you grew up. Your example with your colleague is a perfect example. You thought emotionally, oh, we're all in sync and we're all in tune. No, you had to use cognitive. You were trying to be emotional, more on a deeper emotional empathetic level, and go, oh yeah, we get it because we're the same. Well, no, you're not. She has her own experiences. So I believe that cognitive empathy is the thing that we have to use in all of our day-to-day interactions, and to use it the most. And 1/3 of American adults, and I would imagine this holds true in Canada and in other places. 1/3 of adults are unable to see the point of view of somebody else, to have cognitive empathy. So 1/3 of the people everyone is going to run into today, there's a good chance they are not able to have cognitive empathy.
And I'm also putting this through the lens of like, what's our modern day community? Because we no longer live in caves.
Right.
I'm even thinking of, I'm guessing, Rob. So I mean, I have a friend who unfortunately has gone through miscarriages and a series of miscarriages, and it's really impacted her to the place where she created a podcast to bring people together and to create a more community experience so that people don't have to struggle and suffer alone.
Right.
Now, she's connecting people all over the world who've had a common experience, and though they come from different parts of the world, have different socioeconomic backgrounds, different race, different religions, because they've shared a common emotional experience and they're connecting using a podcast.
Right.
Like, I'm assuming that's emotional. It's a mix of emotional and cognitive, perhaps.
Well, yes. I mean, you're talking about somebody that's experienced a severe life trauma. The loss of a child doesn't get much worse than that. So there's the experience and the rawness of it, that on an emotional level, absolutely they're going to have emotional empathy because they've lived it themselves. So yeah, it's easier for you to get to emotional empathy with somebody that's experienced what you've done. But don't think that, but they're having emotional empathy with them about one issue.
Yeah.
She may not necessarily have emotional empathy with them if they are, pro-vaccine or anti-vax or whatever the
Or come from a
political,
different country with a different healthcare system.
different healthcare system, different issues that are going on, religious beliefs, all of those, like, so you, which is the other thing, like, you don't have to have empathy with the whole person
Yeah.
necessarily,
Which
but
isn't possible, a lot of the time.
yeah, I
Most
mean,
of the time.
we're too complex, and there's too much. There's not enough time, but but I think in that idea of like, okay, who am I going to invite into my cave? Who's going to be part of my tribe that I'm going to have emotional empathy with? If you think about the process of making friends, because I think with your family, there's so much just shared stuff that there's a lot of hopefully emotional empathy that's existing there. And there are cases that they're not. Nothing is absolute, nothing is universal. But if you think about the process of who you become friends with and who become your really good friends, and that difference between, like, emotional empathy is that inner circle of friends. These are the people I just know have me, and I'm like connected to them on this sort of deeper level.
Yeah.
I think that's an emotional empathetic place versus cognitive empathy, which can be other people that you're friendly with, but it's the sort of outer circles. And so work people tend to be in that sort of outer second and third ring of friendship.
Interesting. And then, go for it.
But I would say, yeah, I can have emotional empathy with anyone that is definitely gay or lesbian. As a gay man, I can have emotional empathy with anybody that's gay or lesbian over the idea of coming out or even just being gay and the challenges. I'm not trans, but they are part of our broader community. These struggles, the challenges that somebody that's trans is going through are so much different than what it is to be gay, because there's just a whole other layer onto it. So I can connect with part of that being true to yourself, and I can have emotional empathy with it. It might require cognitive empathy, though, for me to connect with the idea of my gender identity assignment was incorrect at birth. Does that make sense?
For sure, because that's not an experience that you've had. So
Right.
emotional empathy, you can have cognitive empathy there.
Yeah.
easily, more
Yes.
easily. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I can have then, and that can lead me to compassion and saying, yes, absolutely. I agree and support trans rights. And we need to make the world a better place for trans individuals where they feel safe and all the things that they are needing.
Yes. So then here's a question. Can we get to compassion without empathy? And we were talking about this before, and I think your answer is no. So let's talk about compassion, because compassion is more sort of active kindness. And
Right.
so yeah, let's go from empathy, cognitive, emotional into compassion.
Well, what would motivate an act of kindness?
What would motivate an act of kindness? Empathy. I at least can feel or see your perspective and honor it.
I can
And
imagine, yeah, I can imagine how it feels to be you. I can imagine what your life is like and where you could help. And then, therefore, I'm recognizing that I'm in a place to help and can then kind of do that. Empathy, I don't know. I mean, I think about then people writing checks for charity. Is that compassion or is that something else? And probably depends on how it's motivated,
yep.
you know,
Mm.
and where that's coming from. But I don't know if that's then really compassion.
So yeah.
Empathy to me is this waypoint or another, we're all living in the dark in the forest and we come out on the path and we hit this roundabout, and the roundabout is empathy.
Mm.
Once you get to a place of empathy, it enables you to further your journey and get to a place of compassion. Empathy allows you to get to forgiveness. It allows you to have trust. Empathy allows you to communicate, to collaborate. It helps with your critical thinking, with your decision making. It enables ideation. Like it, without empathy, you've got a lot of people that are focused on me, and it's all narcissistic and self validation.
Yeah.
I thought that was the best meeting ever, and then not even bothering to listen to the response.
Yeah. Yeah. Wasn't that the best? All right, let's go get dinner.
Yeah, okay, let's move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. So I am disappointed that we didn't get the chance to have some cognitive empathy, maybe a little bit of emotional empathy in the comment section. But like I said, please do comment after the fact. Rob and I will check it out, and you can send us a message as well. Can we just go through those 5 steps again? So it's dismantle judgment, active listening, ask better. Okay, I'm getting it wrong. Dismantle judgment.
Dismantle judgment, ask more questions, ask good questions. Behind me, you can't really quite see that, but it says listen.
Yeah.
So dismantle judgment, ask good questions, active listening, integrate into understanding is step 4. And then step 5 is use solution imagination.
Nice. And I'm assuming by good, you mean open-ended, unbiased, curious questions.
Open-ended, unbiased, curious, exploratory questions.
Beautiful.
If you're presenting a question, wasn't that a great meeting? That's a leading question.
And that's a yes or no. Yeah.
Well, it is a yes or no, which is closed. But then even, wow, that was an awesome meeting. What did you think?
Yeah.
Is leading you to say, he's thinking that was a great meeting. Therefore, I need to say,
Yeah.
yes.
Versus what was your experience of that meeting?
What'd you think? Yeah.
Yeah.
What'd you think of today?
Yeah.
That's a good open question.
Nice. Nice. As we're landing this empathy plane, any stories, anything that come to heart and mind that you'd be remiss if you didn't share before we hang up our red shirts for the day?
Yes, exactly. And we move on and eat chocolate the rest of the day. Empathy, people need to remember that they're born with it, that they have the ability to actually improve it. And my book, I don't want people to be afraid to read my book. I wrote it intentionally to be enjoyable and entertaining and using my own stories. And I'm just really honest about my failures and some successes, but it's it's been described as very honest and vulnerable and open, and which is who I am as a person. And so I wrote that book. But through all of that, I go through all the steps and I share my own experiences and realizations with the steps. So if you want to find out what it's like to go be an ethnographic researcher and go into people's homes and find the dirtiest home in America, to find, some really unexpected, delightful, life-changing, for me, life-changing experiences, it's all in the book.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, if you've yet to learn more about Rob, check out his profile. He did a reading of a chapter last week, which was so good. What was it again? Mother
would never do that.
Mother would never do that. And it's one thing, Rob, to be vulnerable. It's another thing to have vulnerability from a perspective of how can, you showing your fallibility as a human being help to elevate others to have more empathy, more compassion. And we need a lot more of that in our world today. So thank you, sir. You've become a very close friend very quickly. And I'm so delighted that we could do this. Check out Tell Me More About That, coming out in 8 days. There's the book.
8 days.
Beautifully designed.
Tuesday, 2/22/22.
2/22/22. Rob, any other final words for you, my friend?
Maya Angelou has a quote that I love to cite, where she says, she believes that we all have the ability to be empathetic. We may not have the courage to display it. And so what I would leave with everybody is to be courageous, be empathetic, display it. We'll make the world a better place, one conversation at a time.
I love it. Thank you, Rob. We'll outro with some Beatles again. Thanks for joining us. Sorry we didn't get a chance to get you on the comments, but hopefully next time. Thanks again. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy VD Day.